The San Jose Civic Auditorium held 2,040 seats, and on the evening of October 14, 1973, every one of them was filled before the doors closed. The air inside smelled of floor wax and the particular kind of nervous energy that collects in large rooms when trained people gather to watch other trained people fail. The overhead lights had been brought up to full brightness for the tournament cameras, and the effect was surgical. Nothing softened, nothing hid. In the third row from the floor, wearing a gray cotton jacket over a white undershirt and holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold without his noticing, a man sat alone and watched the warm-up mat with the quiet attention of someone who had already seen everything at least once. He was 33 years old, 5 feet 10. 172 pounds on a morning when he had eaten breakfast. He had no banner above his seat, no team around him, no clipboard, no corner man leaning in to offer analysis. He had driven himself there in a car he would need to have looked at before the next long drive, parked 3 blocks away because the lot was full, and walked to his seat carrying nothing but the cold coffee and a stillness that some men work their entire lives to find and most never do. His name was not on the program for the evening. He was not entered in any bracket. He was there because someone he respected had asked him to come, and because he found, when he was honest with himself, that he could not stay away from rooms where serious work was being done. Nobody in the third row knew who he was. Nobody in the first row knew either. In 8 seconds, that would change. In 8 seconds, 2,040 people would understand something that cannot be explained in a gymnasium or a classroom or a dojo, something that can only be witnessed, and only once in the way it was witnessed that night. 8 seconds, that is all it took. And if you stay until the end of this story, you will understand exactly why those 8 seconds have been discussed in martial arts circles for more than 50 years, and why the man who started them could never quite bring himself to end them the way the crowd expected him to. His name was Viktor Barenko. He was 24 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall and 211 pounds distributed across a frame that had been training since the age of 9. He had been the Amateur Karate Federation's openweight champion for 3 consecutive years. He had traveled that year to competitions in 7 countries, and had not lost a single elimination bout by decision. He had been featured in 2 martial arts publications and 1 regional sports column that called him, in plain language, the most technically complete karate competitor to emerge from the American training circuit in a decade. This was not promotional language. It was accurate. Those who competed against him said privately that the accuracy was, if anything, conservative. Barenko had a particular gift for distance. He read the space between himself and an opponent the way a musician reads time, not as a measurement but as a feeling, constantly recalibrated, constantly precise. His front kick was thrown from farther away than anyone who watched it believed possible, and it arrived faster than the distance suggested it should. He had ended 3 fights in the first 40 seconds with nothing more elaborate than that kick, delivered twice, and the judges had awarded him the bouts cleanly. He had a private motive for being in San Jose that night. 3 months earlier, a ranking committee had declined to include him on a demonstration team that would tour Japan the following spring. The stated reason was scheduling. Barenko had read the letter twice, and then placed it in a drawer he did not open again. He had not mentioned the decision to his training partners. He had not mentioned it to his coach. He had written nothing about it and said nothing. But those who trained with him in the weeks that followed noted, without quite being able to explain what they were seeing, that something in his preparation had become more deliberate, more settled, more cold. He arrived at the San Jose Civic Auditorium with 4 of his students, all of them ranked competitors in their own right. He wore his training uniform to the building and changed in the corridor. He stretched for 11 minutes by the clock on the wall. He did not speak to anyone outside his group. The tournament ran its early brackets without incident. Barenko watched from the side of the mat and offered his students single sentences of correction between their bouts. When one of them asked for his assessment of an opponent they might face in the evening's final rounds, Barenko looked at the man in question for a long moment, and then said, "He telegraphs the hip." That was the entire answer. By 8 o'clock the main hall had settled into the particular attentiveness that precedes serious competition. The bracket had narrowed. The judges were rotating. The tournament director, a man named Harold Spears who had run competitions in California for 14 years and had seen every variety of disruption a martial arts tournament could produce, was standing at the corner table with both hands on the scoring clipboard, watching the mat. It was in this atmosphere, 2,040 people leaning slightly forward in their seats, the lights hard and even overhead, the floor clean, that Viktor Barenko picked up a microphone he had not been given permission to use and said, clearly and without apparent concern for who might hear, the sentence that would define the rest of the evening. He said it looking in the direction of the third row. He said it loudly enough that the nearest judge turned his head. He said that if the man sitting there in the gray jacket was who people seemed to think he was, then the man sitting there in the gray jacket was welcome to come down to the mat. Because Barenko had been curious for some time whether what he had read about him was real, or whether it was the kind of story that grows larger every time a different person tells it. And then he said, I have seen what you do. It is a young man's game. You are not a young man anymore. The auditorium went quiet in a way that had a texture to it. Not the quiet of an empty room. The quiet of 2,040 people choosing, in the same instant, not to make a sound. Harold Spears set the clipboard down on the table. He set it down without looking, which meant his eyes did not leave the third row for the 2 full seconds it took him to complete the motion. He would say afterward that what he saw in those 2 seconds was not the face of a man who had been insulted. It was the face of a man who had just been given permission to do something he had already decided to do. If you want to know what happened when that man stood up, make sure you are subscribed, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This community reaches further than you might think. He stood without hurry. That was the first thing people remembered. Not what came after. The first thing, and the most important, was how he stood. There was no intake of breath, no pushing off the armrest, no squaring of the shoulders to signal intention. He simply went from sitting to standing the way a man rises from a chair in his own home when he hears the kettle. He removed the gray jacket. He folded it once, lengthwise, along a crease that suggested it had been folded that way many times before. He set it on the seat beside him. He picked up the cold coffee cup, looked at it briefly, and passed it to the woman sitting to his left without asking if she minded. She took it without asking why. He descended the 3 steps from the third row to the floor level, and walked to the edge of the mat. He did not walk quickly. He did not walk slowly. He walked at the pace of a man who has calculated exactly how long it takes to cover a known distance, and has chosen to spend all of that time. The recognition came in rows. Not all at once. The way a crowd recognizes something is never all at once. It begins at the front and moves backward like a current disturbed at its source, spreading outward and losing none of its force as it goes. By the time he reached the mat's edge, the recognition had passed the 8th row. By the time he stepped onto the surface and removed his street shoes, placing them beside each other with the toes pointing outward, it had reached the back wall. 2,040 people knew who he was. Viktor Barenko, standing 12 feet away in a fighting stance he had spent 15 years perfecting, was the only person in the building who was not yet certain. He had already lost. He simply did not know it yet. A fight is not 2 men striking each other. That is the surface of it, the part visible to cameras and to spectators in the upper rows. What a fight actually consists of, at the level where the outcome is decided, is a negotiation about distance. Every technique in the vocabulary of every martial art ever formalized is, at its root, an argument about where the line is between what is safe and what is not. The man who locates that line most accurately and moves it most efficiently wins. He does not need to be faster.
He does not need to be stronger. He does not need to be younger. He needs to understand, more completely than his opponent, where the line is. Viktor Barenko understood this better than almost anyone on the American competition circuit. That was the honest assessment of his peers, and it was accurate. What he did not yet understand
What the next 47 seconds would explain to him in a language more precise than any seminar or training session had managed was that understanding something is not the same as having built it into the body over 2 decades of serious use. Understanding is a thing the mind does. The body does something different. And in the space between those two things, a 33-year-old man in a white undershirt was about to make his case. The two men faced each other. And the fourth row, a judo coach named Raymond Testa, who had competed internationally for 11 years, and who had retired from competition only the previous spring, sat with his forearms on his knees and his chin slightly forward, watching with the focused attention of a man who is learning something. At the scoring table, Harold Spears had not reclaimed his clipboard. Against the far wall, a film student named David Corey, who had been hired to document the tournament for a local athletics association, had stopped moving the camera. The camera was pointed at the mat, but the student was not operating it in any active sense. He would say later that he had not wanted to look away long enough to check his settings. Viktor Barenko moved first. This was not a mistake exactly. Barenko always moved first. It was the structural feature of his game that made him dangerous. His ability to initiate from a range at which opponents believe themselves safe. He launched the front kick from 9 feet. 9 feet was beyond what most trained observers would have called a viable range. Had arrived in the space where the target had been. The target was no longer there. Second 1. The kick landed on air. The recovery was immediate. Barenko was not a man who overcommitted, but recovery costs time. In the particular arithmetic of this negotiation, the time cost was 240 milliseconds. It is not a large number. It was large enough. Second 2. He had moved neither back nor sideways. He had moved diagonally, forward and to the outside, at an angle that placed him outside the natural arc of the recovery. He was now closer to Barenko than Barenko had planned for. He was now at a range from which Barenko had no prepared response. Barenko recognized this. He was skilled enough to recognize it. He threw a short combination, left hand, right hand, designed to create space. Both punches were thrown well. Both were technically correct. Second 3. He did not block them. He did not parry them. He was no longer where they were addressed. Raymond Testa, in the fourth row, closed his mouth. He had not been aware it was open. Second 4. Barenko attempted to reset. He stepped back to re-establish his preferred distance. This was the correct response given what he understood about the situation. The correct response arrived 8 inches short of where it needed to land, because the distance he was attempting to re-establish had already been measured and accounted for by the man in the white undershirt. And the step back placed Barenko not at the distance he wanted, but at a different distance entirely, the one his opponent had been steering towards since the moment the front kick landed on air. This is what 2,040 people saw, and most of them could not name. They saw Barenko step back. They saw the man in the white undershirt not chase him. They saw nothing happen for what felt like a long time and was, by the clock, 1 second. And they felt, without being able to explain it, that something had already been decided. Second 5. Barenko attacked again. This was his third committed attempt, and he knew it. There is a specific quality of commitment that a man brings to a third attempt when the first 2 have produced nothing, and skilled observers in the room felt it shift before the technique launched. Raymond Testa's weight came forward in his seat. Harold Spears put his right hand flat on the table. David Corey, against the far wall, gripped the camera. The third attempt was the best of the 3. It was fast, correctly constructed, and delivered with the full force of a man who has 2 years of consecutive championship form in his body and nothing to reach for except the quality of the work he knows how to do. It connected with nothing. The combination had been aimed at where a man would be if that man were standing still. The man had not been standing still. He had been moving at the specific moment the combination launched, not away, not backward, but through a gap that should not have been accessible at that range. A gap that existed because Barenko's weight had distributed itself in the way it always distributed itself in the final beat of that particular combination, a distribution that anyone who had watched enough of his competition footage would have noted, catalogued and remembered. Second 6. The movement that ended the negotiation was not a strike in the sense that word usually means. It was a redirection. The outside of a forearm found the inside of Barenko's extended arm and moved it, not with force but with timing. A degree and a half past the point where the body's structure can compensate. The remainder of the motion delivered a heel palm to the sternum, controlled, placed, arrested 1 inch from full contact, held there for the duration of a breath. Barenko felt it stop. He felt exactly how much of it had been held back. The auditorium absorbed what it had seen in stages. The first stage was silence, not the silence of confusion. The silence of 2,040 people completing a calculation at the same time and arriving, together, at a result that none of them had expected with their minds, even though some of them, the ones who had recognized the man in the third row, had known it somewhere lower than the mind. Viktor Barenko did not fall. He stepped back once, and then stood. The heel palm was held for a full second after contact, then the arm withdrew, slowly, and an open hand replaced it, palm upward, extended at the level of Barenko's shoulder, the gesture identical to the one a man makes when he is offering something. Viktor Barenko looked at the hand for a moment that lasted, in the experience of those watching, considerably longer than the clock recorded. 2,040 people held their attention on that hand and on the face of the man being offered it, because what happened next was in its own way more consequential than the 8 seconds that preceded it. A man who has just been humbled in front of 2,040 people stands at a fork. The two roads from that fork look different and feel different and lead to different places, and the choice between them is made in the seconds before the mind has time to construct justifications. The body decides first. The mind catches up and explains the decision afterward, one way or the other. Viktor Barenko looked at the hand. He looked at it for the full duration of that extended moment. And then, with a slowness that suggested he was making the decision as it was being made rather than arriving at it from somewhere predetermined, he took it. As their hands met, he heard a sentence. It was spoken quietly, at a volume calibrated for one set of ears and no others in the room. The 2,040 people who leaned forward at that moment, and most of them leaned forward, heard nothing. The sentence would not be reported in full for 11 years, when a former tournament official recalled it in a regional martial arts newsletter that printed a circulation of 600 copies. What the official reported was this, that the sentence was not a correction, not a lecture, and not a consolation. It was an acknowledgement, and that the man who spoke it turned and retrieved his shoes from the edge of the mat without waiting for a response. As he walked back toward the third row, Raymond Testa, the retired judo champion, stood. He did not applaud. He simply stood, which in that room and in that moment meant something that applause could not have conveyed. 2 rows behind him, an older man whose name does not appear in any record of the evening rose and placed his hand briefly on the shoulder of the man in the white undershirt as he passed, to confirm, as one witness put it 30 years later, that he was real. The story moved in the way that true stories move when they happen in front of enough credentialed witnesses, not through newspapers. Not through broadcasts, but through the specific and intimate channels of people who train together and trust each other's observations. Raymond Testa told it in 3 dojos within the following month. Harold Spears included a condensed account in a newsletter distributed to tournament officials across 6 western states. David Corey told it at a film school the following spring, prefacing it with the admission that he had been present for something he could not entirely explain, and had since thought about more than anything else he had recorded that year. The details shifted in the telling, as details always do. Some accounts put the crowd at 3,000, some accounts named techniques that were not thrown. One version, circulating by the late 1970s in certain East Coast schools, added a third exchange that had not occurred. The oral history of a witnessed event is never the event itself. It is a series of impressions passed through a series of minds, each of which retains what resonated and releases what did not, until what remains is not the photograph, but the feeling the photograph was trying to capture. What remained, in every version, across every telling, through every gymnasium and training hall and back corridor of every tournament where the story eventually arrived, was the 8 seconds. And the hand, and the sentence that nobody heard. Viktor Barenko competed for 3 more years at the national level. He did not speak publicly about the evening in San Jose for more than a decade. When he did speak about it, in an interview with a martial arts publication in 1986, he said that the experience had rearranged something in his understanding of what training was for. He said this without elaboration. The interviewer noted that he seemed to choose the word rearranged with some care, and that he did not offer a replacement. He retired from competition in 1976 with his record largely intact, and opened a school in the northern part of the state that operated for 22 years, and produced 4 national-level competitors of its own. Whether the rearrangement played a role in the school's particular emphasis on patience and distance control, his former students could only speculate. He never said. The man who had sat in the third row with a cold cup of coffee did not mention the evening in any interview, until a journalist asked him about it directly in 1979, 6 years later. He confirmed the basic facts in 2 sentences. When the journalist pressed for his assessment of Barenko's technique, he said that Barenko was a serious practitioner, and that he had a good kick. That was the entire answer. He did not tell the story again. What those 8 seconds carried, underneath the technique and the timing and the crowd and the hand extended in the dim light of the San Jose Civic Auditorium, was something that does not belong to martial arts specifically. It belongs to every field in which a man believes that what he has accumulated, the titles, the record, the recognition, the certainty that accumulates in a man who has been right about himself many times, constitutes a final answer about what is possible. The difficulty with certainty is not that it is always wrong. The difficulty is that it feels exactly the same whether it is right or wrong. A man who is certain and correct and a man who is certain and mistaken inhabit the same interior state until the moment the world corrects one of them. Viktor Barenko was certain. His certainty was well-founded. He had spent 15 years earning it honestly, through work that was real and results that were real, and nothing about that work or those results was false. What was false was the assumption that certainty earned in one set of conditions transfers without examination into every set of conditions that resembles it. The man in the third row had been doing something with his time that was not visible in a record or a ranking or a title. He had been converting years into understanding. Not the kind of understanding that announces itself or seeks confirmation, the kind that accumulates in the body the way sediment accumulates in still water, slowly, without drama, until the bottom is no longer where it was. A man who tells you what he is capable of and a man who shows you what he is capable of are not delivering the same information. The first is telling you about a story. The second is handing you the evidence directly. In rooms where serious work is done, the evidence is always the only answer that counts. Next week we will tell the story of the afternoon in 1981 when a Navy SEAL instructor made a wager in front of his entire unit, and the specific silence that followed when the wager was settled.